Hey guys, so I wanted to make a video about something a little bit different, and I don't even know if this will end up getting posted. I don't know if I'll like it enough, but I figured I'd like to record it anyway. Just talking about some things that have been on my mind recently. In light of recent events, the tragedy in Orlando that hit a lot of people, and has kind of struck the world over. I think a lot of us are feeling a lot of complex emotions about things, and that can be difficult to deal with sometimes. Grief is a weird and a very insidious emotion, if you could call it that, and it manifests itself in a lot of different ways. And so some people, everyone's affected by tragedy differently, I think, depending on how close you are to it geographically, socially, or even emotionally. Everyone has their own ways of feeling tragedy and dealing with it. And I think a lot of people might not notice, myself included, how disruptions in our world, the way we view the world, our feelings of safety in this world, and how they might be disrupted. And sometimes that's very deliberate. Sometimes people with keener emotional intelligence than I have the wherewithal to say that they are affected by these things, and I admire those people a great deal. But other people still might not have that ability. And I guess if anything, this video is for you. Sometimes you can feel bad and not necessarily know why you feel bad. And I think that's very strange, if nothing else. You don't necessarily know where to place your emotions, and depending on what you have going on in your life, you could put it on a number of different things. But for example, a lot of people might feel in a time like this very lonely, profoundly lonely, and not understand why. And there's nothing wrong with feeling lonely, certainly. But the question really comes down to, why do we feel this way? And it's, as anything in this situation, it's difficult to say. Loneliness is a weird thing, a weird feeling that doesn't like to get talked about. It's spoken about in hushed tones, and to go to someone and say, I feel lonely, is very rarely met with the proper response, which is probably just to sit there and listen. Instead, people try and offer their advice, or suggest to you manners in which you might find a way to fix this for yourself. And that's not necessarily what needs to be done in these moments. But the feeling of loneliness is weird, because it's not necessarily something you can remedy effectively. At least not in my experience. And it manifests itself outside of other relationships, which might typically be seen as solutions to loneliness. There are a lot of people who, myself included, who would likely say, well, gratifying interpersonal relationships are great for helping to avoid loneliness. And that's true, but there's also the possibility of having those relationships and still feeling profoundly lonely. And it's agonizing to not understand why. Some other people might take this as an opportunity to comment on the state of technology and how that has affected us as a society, how that affects our personal relationships. I would not go so far. I know from experience, and I know from contact with people with experience, that the internet is a excellent tool for allowing a variety of people to establish interpersonal relationships that they might not otherwise have. I mean, what I'm doing right now is something that would have been impossible 15 years ago. And so for someone who is extremely introverted like myself, to be able to offer advice and communicate with others on a regular basis from the sanctity of my own home is an incredible privilege. So I would never go and say that lacking or an excess of technology would be the cause of such feelings of loneliness. And even having direct personal technology has allowed me to have extensive online and personal contact with those that mean a great deal to me. And so I think that's a gross oversimplification of the situation. So the root of loneliness may very much be somewhere else. And it's hard to say where that is. But I think it comes down to one principal thing. And this is spoken from a position where I'm familiar with a certain aspect, and there may be people out there that are dealing with the same thing, but I can speak from the experience of recently being out of a very important relationship and what that means. And after thinking about it, I think what it ultimately comes down to is the universal human need to feel needed in some capacity. And I think that is compromised in times like this, because the question becomes, what am I needed for? If tragedy is going to occur regardless, then what is my purpose? And that goes doubly for relationship circumstances. When you find yourself when you're in a relationship and your daily activity is focused around the act of providing for another, and suddenly that is removed from you, I think that's very jarring. And I don't really know what else to say about that. That same feeling is compromised in times like this, because we look at the world and we say, well, what are we doing? What can we do? We feel helpless, and feeling helpless is one of the worst feelings in the entire world. And I want to point out, perhaps most importantly, that in situations like this, the people we find helping are the people who show us what purpose we have. And I think that's very important. But the point I'm trying to make here, perhaps not very articulately, to my regret, but the point I'm trying to make is that out there somewhere, and you may know them, you may know that they know that they feel this way, or you may not, but either way, it's important to recognize that someone needs you. It may be a younger sibling or someone who looks up to you in another capacity, but one way or another there is someone out there that needs you. And this goes for everyone all the time. And that's something we forget, especially in times of weakness and in times of tragedy. And it's I think one of the most important lessons we can have to learn is that no matter who you are, that you are very important. And it sounds sappy and it sounds cheesy, but I know that out there are not only people who feel this way, but people who need to hear this. And without belaboring the point, because I think what I'm saying is either understood or misunderstood at this point, the only thing I could really say about it is that regardless of who you are, what you do, or how you feel about who you are, you are someone's hero. I'll see you next time.